Alcatraz prison on an island off San Francisco was a purpose-built former military prison recommissioned by J. Edgar Hoover. Its harsh, dehumanizing conditions were meant to break and control even the toughest, most unruly prisoners. Prohibition and the Great Depression sparked a crime wave in both organised and disorganised crime. Alcatraz was not set up to rehabilitate prisoners, but to punish them. The harsh way of life in the prison was supposed to act as a deterrent to crime and problem prisoners in other institutions. Notable prisoners included Machine Gun Kelly, Nicky Cohen and Al Capone. Alcatraz was also thought to be unescapable. The hardened steel bars of the cells were heat treated, meaning even a hacksaw would break apart when trying to saw through. It also had the highest guard to prisoner ratio in America. This meant guards could do prisoner counts every 15 minutes. Sniper nests also surrounded the prisoners and marksmen had shoot to kill orders. One of the first attempts at escape was committed by gangster Arthur Doc Barker in 1939. He was serving a life sentence for murder, kidnapping and armed robbery. Whilst in the D-Block isolation unit, he noticed his steel bars did not have the same upgraded steel. He and 4 other inmates used a smuggled hacksaw blade to saw the bars off their cells. This meant they could leave their cells whenever they wanted. To conceal what they had done, they put their bars back on, hiding the cuts with paint. However, they were not able to saw through the window bars outside their cells, which had been heat treated. But Barker would not give up. He was able to have a bar spreader device smuggled into his cell. The device would bend the bars sideways, creating enough tension that they would eventually snap. On January 13th, 1939, he would make an attempt at escape. He and his 4 other jailmates snuck out of their cells and used the device to snap the window bars. Incredibly, they were able to make it outside of the prison walls. However, they were still on an island. They began to make a raft at the side of the water, but they were caught by guards. 4 of the 5 men surrendered, but Doc was shot clean in the head. It took a further 24 years for an inmate to break through the cell bars. The man who did it was John Paul Scott, a convicted armed robber. Scott worked in the kitchen in the basement of Alcatraz. Instead of using steel hacksaws, he used string covered in wax and scouring powder to cut away at the bars. After a long continuous effort over a year, he managed to cut his way through. On December 16th, 1962, Scott and jailmate Darryl Parker jumped through the barless window and ran down to the water. They used stolen rubber gloves to make floats and began swimming to the mainland. Parker didn't make it, but Scott made it onto the beaches of San Francisco. However, the coldness had taken over him and he lay paralysed and motionless with hypothermia, so he was quickly apprehended. The water surrounding Alcatraz was not smooth, calm waters, but thick, rough, freezing cold currents. The shore is at least a mile away on either side, and because of how cold the water is, that distance is almost impossible to swim. This is because after 30 minutes, hypothermia sets in. The San Francisco Bay also tunnels the water through a tight gap. This means that the waves travel at a speed of around 6 miles per hour. Floyd Hamilton, who was once public enemy number 1 in America, also made his attempt at freedom. Hamilton was friends with Bonnie and Clyde and acted as their getaway driver. When arrested, he tried to escape from Leavenworth prison, so like all problem prisoners, he was sent to Alcatraz. When he arrived at the island, he feigned being a good prisoner. He was able to earn privileges because of his exemplary behaviour. He was put to work making cement blocks at the prison industry building. The building was right at the edge of the island. Also, this part of the island was not heavily guarded. Hamilton, along with a bank robber named James Borman, another bank robber named Harold Brest, who was also a kidnapper, and a kidnapper named Fred Hunter, planned an escape. They sawed through the mesh windows of the concrete building. On April 13th, 1943, they used work tools like hammers and work knives to attack patrolling guards, subduing them and tying them up. They then made their escape through the sawed-through windows. They tried to swim to the shoreline, but a rifle guard saw them. He shot and killed James Borman. Brest surrendered and Fred Hunter hid inside a cave. However, he also quickly gave up. Hamilton was able to hide out in a cave on the island for 3 days, but an exhausted and freezing Hamilton had to give up because there was no way he could swim to San Francisco in his weakened state. Another inmate named John Giles made a more sophisticated escape attempt. Giles had previously escaped prison and was an armed robber and murderer. He would use his intelligence to his advantage by appearing like a trustworthy intellectual rather than an unruly problem inmate. This good behaviour also got him a good job. He worked at the docks of the island as a sweeper. He built up trust with the guards so much over 10 years that they often left him unguarded. But at that time he had been collecting parts and creating a military uniform. He was able to do this because military uniforms would pass through the dock to be washed in Alcatraz by prisoners. On July 31st, 1945, he put on his military uniform as an army boat would be visiting the island. When they arrived, he stepped on board the ship. However, the ship was only going to the neighbouring military dock on Angel Island instead of San Francisco. After realising he was missing, he was soon caught out and handcuffed as soon as he landed. However, the real escape from Alcatraz was made in 1962 by Frank Morris and Clarence and John Anglin. This escape was the inspiration for the 1979 film Escape from Alcatraz, starring Clint Eastwood. The Anglin brothers had a long history of stealing. Ever since they were children, they had been robbing people. They even committed a bank robbery using a toy gun. For this, they were given more than 30 years behind bars. John was sent to Alcatraz after an attempted escape from Leavenworth prison. His brother joined him a year later. Frank, on the other hand, took to crime to survive as a child. He was abandoned as a child and had to steal to survive. He was first sentenced to 14 years for a bank robbery. Another prisoner named Alan West was originally part of the escape plan. All 4 prisoners were housed in separate cells next to each other. This meant they could constantly communicate and plan the escape. Unlike others before them, they did not even attempt to cut through the heat-treated steel bars. Instead, they would target the ventilation grills in their cells. They initially used forks and spoons to carve through the brick walling. However, incredibly, they were even able to invent power tools to drill through the brick. When they drilled through the wall and removed the vents, they used their arts and crafts skills to paint and construct a fake vent to put over the gap in the wall. Incredibly, the escape attempt was no secret to other prisoners. Many prisoners even helped them in their escape. 80 odd prisoners knew about the plan. It is unbelievable no one snitched, but loyalty was perhaps more of a cherished virtue back then. Thanks to a tip-off from Alan West, they found that there was an unsealed vent at the top of cell block B leading to the roof. It was said that West was the mastermind of the plan and came up with it whilst working as a maintenance man with special privileges to otherwise off-limit areas. Meanwhile, Morris and the Anglin brothers made a plan to deal with escaping across the icy cold water. To do this, they stole and stitched together raincoats, water sealing them with glue. This allowed them to create a life raft and life jackets. They learned how to do this after reading an article in a magazine. West also used his job to pile up and hang blankets in an area of the cell block. This obscured the prisoners' cells. He convinced guards this was a necessity for keeping the cell block clean and dust free. They also made fake dummy heads to put on their beds when they were outside the cells. This aimed to convince guards they were just sleeping during prisoner counts. They used soap, brick dust and toilet paper to create fake heads. They also got another prisoner to smuggle human hair from the barber shop to stick to the heads. When the prisoners broke through their cells, they climbed up piping behind the cells to reach up to the cell corridor roof. They escaped their cells after 9:30 PM after lights out. They put their dummy bodies in place, fixed the fake grills and squeezed out of their cells. However, despite being the mastermind, Alan West could not escape in time. This was because a steel bar went across the front of his grill. They finished the raft at the top of the cell block and then broke through the roof vent. They then ran across the roof and climbed down the side of the building. They then cut through 2 fences and fled across the water in the raft. In the morning, as prisoners were standing for count, 3 bodies were missing. A guard then put his hand through a cell to slap one of them awake, and a plastic head rolled along the floor. The siren sounded and the hunt was on. But this escape would give rise to one of the most lasting mysteries in the modern world. One question remains: did they survive? The Coast Guard, the police and the FBI conducted an air, land and sea search for the escapees. However, they could not be found. Some have doubted that the men could have made it to land, but as no bodies were found, there is still a likelihood they did. However, some evidence did start to wash up on shore, such as a paddle and family photographs. As these pictures were of such sentimental importance, the FBI concluded that the raft must have drowned, as they would not have left the photographs behind. But that would be an excellent distraction. Life jackets all appeared in separate locations in San Francisco Bay, which seemed to suggest they may have drowned. However, the raft was never found. The FBI watched over the escapees' families and tried to find them for 15 years. The authorities never found any substantial evidence that they had survived, though sightings did dribble in to keep the mystery open. Some people believe that Harlem gangster Bumpy Johnson organised for a boat to pick them up in the bay. Police records even show a boat was in the bay on the night of the escape, even though it was illegal to be so close to Alcatraz in a boat. Some also believe they fled to Mexico or Brazil, and that's why very little evidence of their existence could be found. It was noted that they had been studying Spanish in prison. A map of Mexico was even found in Alan West's cell. Over the years, the Anglin family would receive mysterious letters and postcards. The mother of the two Anglin brothers also anonymously received flowers every single year of her birthday until she died. Also mysteriously, some believe the Anglin brothers may have attended their mother's funeral dressed as women. Police reports show two exceptionally tall women in heavy makeup attended the funeral and said not a word to anyone. Only months after the escape, Alcatraz was shut for good. It was no longer the inescapable fortress it once was. The mystery remains: did Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers successfully escape, survive and remain undetected? Until concrete proof emerges, it remains a mystery.